28-year-old Jocko, 38-year-old Jocko, and now the 47-year-old Jocko. What is the difference between those three leaders?
When I was a little tiny kid, 5, 6, the only thing I can remember was wanting to be some kind of commando. My grandfather was in the Army, and he was retired from the Army, but that wasn't really it. I just instinctively was putting camouflage on my face and carrying around sticks and carving them to look like machine guns when I was a little kid. It was awesome, yeah. What I wanted to do, and it's a lot of fun.
Was it tougher? Was it what you expected? Was it easier for you?
It was what I expected. It's hard, it's fun. There's no doubt it's a challenge. It finds your weaknesses. The initial training that you go through, the screening process, it finds out what your weaknesses are. And a lot of really kind of squared away people don't make it. A guy that was an NCAA water polo player, captain of a team, and I had another guy that was a Olympic alternate gymnast. And they were both in my training class, and both of them quit. So those guys were infinitely better athletes than I was, but apparently they didn't want to be there as bad as I did. If I could solve that riddle of who's going to make it, I'd be in a totally different world, because they try to solve that riddle. They try and figure out who's going to make it, and you just don't know. Because I talk about these really good athletes and really smart guys that quit, but there's also guys that were not good athletes at all, worse athletes than me, and they'd make it through. It's really hard to predict. I was like an average athlete, maybe slightly below average athlete. I wasn't that into school. I didn't get great grades. I was kind of a rebel. I was a pretty rebellious kid. I liked hardcore music and heavy metal music, and that's what I was into.
As a Navy SEAL, what was the first time where you were deployed, you had your first project coming out? What was the first time you had something to go out on?
The first time I ever fired my weapon at the enemy was 13 years later in 2003. So there's 13 years of just training hard. I did deployments. We did seizures of vessels in the Persian Gulf. So that was, it's a real mission, and I guess something bad could happen, but nothing bad ever did happen. And other than that, it was not until I went to Iraq in 2003 for my first combat deployment.
When it comes down to building leaders, are you more from the thought of, I find leaders and I direct them, or are you more coming from the place of, I build leaders, or both?
Both. Is it nature or nurture that turns someone into a leader, and are leaders born or are leaders made? And the answer is both, because you and I both know there's some people that just have a lot of really good natural leadership characteristics, and they have an easier time stepping up into a leadership position. There's some people that don't have those characteristics, and there's different skills that you have to make you a good leader, whether it's being the ability to read people, the ability to articulate well, the ability to look at complex problems and get them solved. These are skills, and some people have higher levels in some of those skills than other people. And some people, when you start to train them, they can get better at some of those skills. And so, yes, you can get better. You start at a baseline, whatever that you are as a human being, you start there, and you can definitely improve. There's only one type of human being that can't improve as a leader, and that's the person that lacks humility. Because when someone lacks humility, you can't teach them. If you lack humility, I can't help you. You can look at a person, you can do an assessment, and I did pretty good with my assessment. How many times have you hired somebody you thought was going to knock it out of the park, and 2 months later you end up firing them?
Long list.
It's a long list, right? How many times you know what, I'll give a guy a shot, and then they end up being a great person. You get right some of the times, probably 60, 70% of the time, maybe even more, but you definitely can't guarantee anything. And that's why I look at everyone with an open mind. I look at people with an open mind. I want you to be humble if you want to learn, but I'm looking at you with an open mind. I'm not looking at you, putting you in a box and thinking, oh, he doesn't really have this capability. I'm looking at you like, okay, let's hope he has the capability. And if he does, we're going to build on it. We're going to turn him into a solid leader. We start to talk about data. I'm going to look at what their track record's like. I'm going to look at what kind of person they were, where did they come from, what have they done before, did they play sports, were they successful, how were their grades. Now, obviously, this for me is like a bad example, because like I told you, I wasn't great at sports. My grades weren't great. Now, when I went to college, my grades were awesome, but that was later, right? If you would have looked at me coming out of high school, you said, I don't know about this guy. You probably wouldn't have hired me coming out of high school. You said, he doesn't have great grades, doesn't look that disciplined. You know what? We'll take a pass on this guy. And this is why you got to be careful. This is why leadership is so hard. What I do is I have an open mind when I deal with people, and I slowly start to put responsibility on them and see where they take it. Relationships and trust are almost the same word, right? A relationship is something that we've built trust. Now, you can have a bad relationship, and what does that mean? That means there's no trust there. I don't trust you, we have a bad relationship. How do I build trust with someone? The way I build trust with people is I give them trust. So if you're working for me, I say, hey, I want you to do this mission, Patrick. Come up with a plan. I'm showing you that I trust what your plan's going to be. Now, I'm going to make sure that your plan is good. I'm going to review it, but I'm going to give you a lot of autonomy. I'm going to give you trust. And when I give you trust, what's your reaction? You think to yourself, this guy trusts me. And then the way I build trust in reverse is when you make a mistake, instead of me jumping down your throat and hanging you out to dry, instead I say, okay, you know what? My fault, I should have given you better direction. Here's what we're gonna do next time. So now you look at me and you go, hey, I screwed this thing up and Jocko still trusts me. I trust him. And that's how I build trust. I give it. I give trust to build trust.
If I'm really putting an effort, but my plan maybe not the best plan, you're still gonna give me second chances to work on it and get better at it?
I will micromanage you more. I can't trust you as much. We do a business deal or we're in business. I don't send you out with the biggest client I've got when I just met you and say, hey, I trust you. No, I give you a little client and I say, hey, go make this happen. And you come back and you say, hey, look, I did it. And I say, great. And you trust me a little bit more. Or maybe you screw that one up. And I say, okay, let me review. What'd you do? What mistakes got made? And you say, oh, well, I did this. And okay, we correct that. But I don't come down hard on you because I'm trying to build a relationship with you. Mm-hmm. If I come down hard on you, do you even want to work for me? Do you even want to be, if I come down, this is pathetic, you screwed this up, this is your fault, you're looking for another job.
That's
come on.
right.
Whereas if I say, okay, let's look at what we can do better, then I'm building the trust. But you might be very trustworthy for many years, and then all of a sudden you go out and you do something underhanded with a client, you try and rip them off or rip me off. Yeah, I mean, you're not going to have trust from me anymore. The last chapter in the book, Extreme Ownership, is called The Dichotomy of Leadership. And it talks about balancing these opposing forces that exist all over. There's so many things that you can go too far in one direction. You and I are friends. If we start going out for dinner every night and then we're hanging around, we're having beers, and all of a sudden we're bros, but we come into work on Monday and I say, hey, you know what, I want you to get started on this project. And you go, come on, man, I don't want to do that project. And all of a sudden I feel awkward. So I got too close. The other side is, I don't know you at all, don't know what drives you, don't know what your motivations are, don't know that you got a sick kid or a wife that's giving you problems or whatever the case may be, and I don't know that. So now when I come in and say, hey, get this project done, and you go, come on, man, and I don't realize that there's things going on in your life. So I have to balance this dichotomy, and it's not just with relationships, it's with everything. Because if I micromanage you and I don't let you make any decisions yourself, well, you're never going to step up and learn how to lead because you don't get to make any decisions for yourself. If I don't manage you at all and you don't know what direction to go in, well, now you don't know what you're doing and you're lost with no direction. So that's problematic. So I got to balance those two. It's got to be in the middle. The title Extreme Ownership, it's very powerful, and it definitely exemplifies and clarifies that you need to take ownership of what's going on in your world. They start applying that extreme idea into other things. Like, I'm gonna be extreme in my discipline, or I'm gonna be extreme in the way I talk to people. That doesn't work as a leader. It just doesn't work. A leader has to be balanced. For me, it's about awareness. A lot of people aren't even aware, right? They aren't aware of the fact that they can get too close. They aren't aware of the fact that they can be too far away. And they aren't aware of the indicators, right? And by the way, this goes through everything. Like, as a business leader, right, you gotta take risk. If you take too much risk, what happens? You fail. If you take no risk, you don't grow, and you fail as well. Communicating in a direct manner. Can you be too direct with your people? Everyone says, no, you gotta tell them what's going on. No, actually, you can be too direct. You can be too direct with your people, and you can make them defensive. You can make them gun shy, right? Now, can you be not direct enough? Absolutely, you can be not direct enough. If all I'm saying to you is like, start lifting your numbers up a little bit, that'd be helpful. But if I go, look, if you don't get your numbers up, you're fired. Well, that's too direct. Growing up in the military and seeing the way other people react to leadership, and seeing someone that's a super hard ass that comes down strong on everyone, and seeing what that produces, because it doesn't produce good results. When I first started my leadership consulting company, one of the very first clients I had, I'm talking to the CEO on the phone, and he says, I can't wait you to come here and whip my people into shape. And I said, you know, if you're looking for someone to whip your people into shape, you should really look for someone else, because I'm not going to whip anyone into shape. And by the way, whipping people into shape doesn't work. It doesn't turn them into what you want them to do. It's like a dog. You beat a dog, sure, it'll get off the couch right now, and you can beat it when it barks, and you can beat it when it does something else wrong, but eventually you just have a broken dog that's not going to protect your house anymore. You have to balance it. The most kind of leaders that were considered to be the harshest and most disciplinary, they always, all of them, have a side to them that is very soft. Chesty Puller, famous Marine, the most famous Marine ever. And he's known as a complete hard disciplinarian. But when you read about the way he treated his troops, he loved those guys, and they knew it, and he could be hard on them. And even though he's being hard on them, he had a way of making that connection, and he knew how to balance that dichotomy of being too hard and being too soft. So what I think is important is to start to recognize the signs of when you're going too far in one direction or the other. If you're working for me and I'm looking at you and I'm telling you what to do and you're showing no initiative, right? You're coming into work and you're waiting for me to come in and you're waiting with your pen and paper. You want to do a good job.
Yeah.
And when I tell you what to do, you go out and you execute it, but I'm not seeing any initiative from you. That's an indicator to me that I'm micromanaging you and I'm giving you too much direction and I'm not letting you grow. So I had a guy that worked for me, and this is when I was a young radio man. I had a secondary radio man. He wasn't too confident with what was going on. He didn't really know quite what to do. So every day I started giving him a yellow sticky that said check boxes and what I wanted him to do that day. And I would give it to him, and he would nail it. He'd knock it out of the park. But the next day I'd come in, and instead of him thinking, oh, well, I had to do this yesterday, maybe I should do it today, he didn't even think that. He got in the habit of waiting for me to give him a yellow sticky that said what he needed to do on it. So I hadn't developed any initiative from it. So I realized, you know what? I gotta stop doing that. So then I started saying, hey, you tell me what you're gonna do tomorrow. He's taken aback, like, what do you mean? You know what operation we got coming up? You tell me what you're gonna do tomorrow. And then he started growing and getting that initiative. You have your company, you go into a meeting, you show up 10 minutes late to a meeting for whatever reason. There's 8 people in the meeting and they're sitting there like this with their notebooks waiting for you to come in. So you're 10 minutes late, they've just been sitting there waiting for you. They are being micromanaged and they don't have any initiative. Other side of the spectrum, you show up 10 minutes late for your meeting. There's supposed to be 8 people in there, there's 4 left. The other 4 took off, 2 of them are talking about something, and 2 of them are starting to plan a project that you don't know anything about, that you don't even want them to do. That means you're not managing them enough. Because what you should see is you show up 10 minutes late for a meeting, the second person in the chain of command is in there, and he says, hey Patrick, we already started, I'll debrief you afterwards if you just want to take a seat and listen up, and okay, Mike, why don't you go over that again? So somebody took initiative, took control, and stepped up and led. And you should be, hey great, you know what, debrief me later, I'm gonna leave. You don't even need to be there anymore. Because some people, they're born with initiative. Some people, you gotta hold them back. Some people, you gotta pull in the reins, which is great. And I'd rather have those people that I gotta pull in the reins. The immediate impression that everyone would consider of me, and I hear this all the time, is that Jocko would allow no slack whatsoever, no mercy on anything, right? You're out of regulations, I'm gonna drop the hammer on you. Well, the fact of the matter is, that doesn't work as a leader. In the military, you know, people wear patches on their uniforms. Well, the SEAL teams has a reputation for being very unprofessional, don't really know how to wear uniforms well. We don't wear uniforms a lot. We just have a bad reputation. And one of the things that once the war started and we started getting these high-speed camouflage uniforms with Velcro everywhere, well, guys started making their own patches. The way you appear in a uniform is very important. And I knew that also soldiers and officers in the Army and Marines and Marine Corps, when they look at someone that's out of uniform, they look at that person and says, hey, this guy can't even put on a uniform, right? How am I going to trust him out on the battlefield? That's just the mindset that they have. It's a good mindset, right? If you don't have attention to detail on that stuff, that's a problem. Well, in the SEAL teams, we're real slack about that. I said to my guys, look, we're not wearing patches, no patches. And my 2 platoon commanders, they said, okay, you know, fine, no patches, we won't wear patches. But they really wanted to wear patches. So behind my back, they went and they got patches made, task unit bruiser patches. What they would do is, if they were going on an operation that I wasn't going on, when they'd roll out the wire, they'd make a call on the radio and say, patches on, and they'd pull out their patches and put their patches on. They basically disobeyed a direct order from me. Would have been fine, except for there was a certain operation that they went on, there was an embedded photographer on, and the pictures came back, and I had all the pictures. And I see all my guys with patches that I told them not to wear. You know what I did? I didn't do anything.
You didn't bring it up.
I didn't bring it up. I realized, number one, we were fighting in a very hard environment where troops were getting wounded and killed every single day. For me to focus my leadership capital on something that small was a complete waste of my leadership capital. Number 2, I realized that these guys, that was a boost in their morale. That made them feel like a tighter unit. That was a big deal for them, and it meant a lot to them. And so for me to go in and rip that morale away from them would have been a down step in their vision of me and their respect for me, and it would have antagonized our relationship. And the guys continued to do it, and it was not a big deal. Now, they didn't wear any inappropriate patches. The patches that they wore were all the same, so it was uniform. They're way outside the box. And if you do something that's really egregious, right, and we gotta debrief it, absolutely. If we gotta learn, we gotta debrief, we gotta have hard caveat to that is that doesn't give permission. people, collective and individual. You know, if the platoon screws up an operation, we're going to debrief it. If it was minor mistakes and things that could be corrected, it'll be a gentler debrief. And because my goal is to have people like each other. We don't like each other when we're calling each other out and making each other look bad. Would you rather win or be liked? Well, I'm going to tell you those aren't opposites. In my mind, the team that likes each other, they win. The team that is battling each other,
I think that's all
they
the time,
lose.
no? What's more important to you in team building, trust or like?
Trust, obviously. I don't like people that I don't trust, so those two things aren't opposites either. You're going to get people at the high end of the spectrum that are total studs, and you're going to get people at the bottom end of the spectrum that are not. If I get someone that's not that competitive, okay, well, what's going to make them do better? What's going to make them drive harder? The furthest out. Enough that you realize I'm on your side.
What's the difference between the 28-year-old Jocko, 38-year-old Jocko, and now the 47-year-old Jocko? What is the difference between those three leaders?
The older I get, the less I know. One of the things that I realized in a leadership position is that the words that you say matter, the actions you take matter, people are listening, people are watching, people are respecting or disrespecting you based on how you carry yourself. The amount of guys that had experienced their teammates killed in action was minuscule. Literally what I told my guys was, we've crossed a line, and there's no possible way to replace or describe or overcome the amount of just heart-wrenching sadness that you feel when you lose a teammate. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't know what to say. The only thing that I know to do is to go back to work. And so that offered me a small bit of perspective to think to myself that human beings, we can feel like we're special. We can feel like no one's ever been through what I've been through, and the world is hard for me and easier for everyone else. Well, the reality is that's not true, and we're not special. And the things that people go through, other people have gone through, most likely much, much worse and much more significant. So that, to me, was it gave me at least some level of perspective to realize that other warriors had gone through this before. This was my turn, and this is how I'm going to try and handle it. In Ramadi, there were soldiers and Marines getting killed just about every day, wounded for sure every day, and killed. I mean, it was bad. It was a reality for me. I mean, I knew that as bad as it was there, the chances of making it through a whole deployment without losing someone would have been very, very small. And I knew that. That's the reality of combat. Number one is prioritize and execute. The priority was take care of my guys. That was the priority. My family is back here in California, they're fine. I don't need to worry about them. I need to worry about the guys that are in my charge, and that's what I did, and that's what I focused on. And you know, that's probably an answer that some people don't want to hear because it seems cold-blooded, but actually the opposite is true. And you know, you got guys that also have families to go home to. And so for me to be focused on anything other than taking care of those guys is wrong. When you see people in these hard situations, that's when human nature gets revealed. And the more you can understand human nature, the better leader you're going to be.